Okay, for those of you who may be requesting some more detailed information on my setup, this video is going to be that. Now, it's going to be a longer video because I'm going to be going over in detail the individual parts and cost of what I paid at the time that I purchased them throughout the entire setup, okay? If you're looking for a more generalized, kind of general overview of my system, I have a video that I had just posted here, and I'll get a link in the description for that. But this is for those who want specific and greater detail as far as each individual part, maybe why I chose it, how it works in the system. So what you can see here, this will jump out right in front of you. This, I just got this off the internet. Because I live in an apartment, there's always the possibility that for emergency reasons, the complex maintenance may need to enter the apartment. Now, I know the maintenance guys pretty well, so under most cases, they would know already that I have this. They know I've got the panels, and they don't really care. But if, let's say, a fireman or an electrician or somebody else were to enter my apartment for any reason, for emergency purposes or whatever, and they saw this box, this is a good indication right here, right up front, that I'm dealing with a 12-volt circuit, okay? And so this is not 120 volts, 115 volts. So the stuff behind here is not enough to hurt anyone. You don't really start feeling the pain of voltage until, you know, after 48 volts, roughly about 50 to 60, depends on the person. But this here, no matter what I touch on the inside here, it's not going to hurt me at all, okay? Now that's me touching it. I can still short things out, I can still cross things out, there's still a chance for fire. In fact, there was in our local news, there was somebody who burnt down their entire house on a dead 9-volt battery. That's not a joke. They threw it in a trash bag, they set it out in their garage, and it crossed with something that was in there, and it was enough heat generated, it caught the bag on fire, it caught the garage on fire, and of course the house went with it. So I'm not saying that because it's just 12 volts that this is not at all risk for a fire. What I'm saying is that if you were to open this box, you could work on it even with the system live without a problem. And I have plenty of fuses inside here to protect it from fire. So everything in here is fused so that if something does short out or cross or the battery shorts or whatever, the whole circuit's going to be broke, so there's no chance in fire. And of course, there's always that small little itty bitty chance, but then again, anything in your home has a chance to catch fire. Your microwave, your stove, your radio, I mean anything in your home has a chance to catch fire. This is no greater risk than any of the other items that you have in your home, okay? But this right here kind of sets, you know, anyone at ease who's not familiar with this setup. And as I said, the maintenance guys, they pretty much know what I have. They've all seen this, and you know, they think it's pretty fascinating. So anyway, so that's why I did that. That's simple, okay? Now, onto the actual enclosure box. Okay, so this enclosure box is actually a non-metallic enclosure box. It's made by Arlington. It measures 12 inches by 12 inches by 4 inches deep, okay? I paid $23 Amazon Prime for this enclosure box. So a relatively good deal on this box. It's non-metallic, which is what I wanted. I didn't want it to be conductive in any way. So it's non-metallic. It has a fair amount of room in the inside, more than what I need. And it allows me to cut out places for my various indications, like this voltmeter or this ammeter here. So I just use a Dremel and cut out the holes required. So it's a really nice enclosure box. So that's the deal on the enclosure box. I'll go ahead and open it. I just use either a screwdriver or Allen wrench or something to hold that together. You could put a lock over there, anything else that you wanted to. It has a cutout here for a lock. But the enclosure box, you know, opens up just like this, and get something here to hold the door open. So it also has these holes down here so that you can actually place wire through. And it has holes on the top as well, same holes, identical, that you can place wire through. So I found this to be perfect for what I needed, because I don't have a lot of electronics. There's other off-grid solar battery kits on YouTube. They've got some pretty elaborate setups. I didn't need that. I don't have the room for one, and I don't have the ability to add, you know, a kilowatt worth of panels to my apartment. So this little setup here, this little case, is actually perfect for my needs. Okay, on the inside here, you'll see I have terminal blocks. I have one here for positive. I have one here for negative. These are Ammeter 600 volts, 45 amp, 3-row, actually it's 2-row, 3-position terminal blocks. And I got these specifically so that I could wire in an entire circuit, which I have there. In the middle there is my solar panels. On the right there's my bicycle generator. I can add something else here if I want, another solar panel if I want to, whatever. Be able to wire all of this together and output it to a single wire. So that's the reason that I did this. And you can see I use 8-gauge wire. I got this 8-gauge wire at Home Depot. It's like 60 cents a foot. And it's red, and I have black on this side, so I know what's positive and negative. You know, I already know that, but just to make it neater. And on the end here, you'll notice that I'm using spade connectors. You might be able to see those or not. Those are actually automotive audio spade connectors. They're 4-gauge wire spade connectors, but the 8-gauge ones that were there, I was reading on Amazon that some people were saying that 8-gauge wire wasn't completely compatible with them, so I decided to go with the 4-gauge, but they're not that much bigger anyway, so they fit this terminal block fine. Okay, now the spade connectors, they're just standard, you know, 4-gauge to 8-gauge spade connectors. I mean, it's as simple as that. I ended up getting a set of, I got 4 sets for, I think it was about $25 for the 4. Now that seems like a lot, but they're gold plated, and obviously they'll handle the current of a 4 to 8 gauge wire. So I wanted to go just a little bit overkill on that. Now another thing is that beyond crimping these, I also added a bead of solder on the end of them, on the inside, so they will actually make even better contact. So you know, the solder was really cheap, and solder gun and so on. But so anyway, those are the terminal blocks. When I expand this system beyond 45 amps, of course I will have to replace those. That's fine, that's expected, but I'm not going to reach that point for a while. So these should be sufficient for my needs for quite a while, many years. So that covers my 2 terminal blocks, and they're actually pretty simple. There's actually 2 different designs, which is weird. You can see here that there's a this plastic piece covers this entire thing here, but on this side it doesn't. There's actually holes there, and they're identical, so I don't know if I just got 2 different manufacturers or what, but so they are identical. And the great thing is that they hold 45 amps of current plus 600 volts. So 600 volts is a lot of electricity. That's more than my wall outlet will put out. So these will handle the job for sure. And if I begin to expand even further, then I can just get a bigger terminal block. Okay, you'll notice on the bottom down here, I have a 50 amp, 75 millivolt divider shunt. This shunt here is required to monitor amperage across a line. One common problem, and I saw this on Amazon, and it just made me want to just laugh so hard. One common problem. I've got this analog ammeter here. Okay, this analog ammeter is a 75 millivolt ammeter. I know it's hard. I can't get it quite to focus on that, but anyway, it's a 75 millivolt ammeter. And it'll run up to 50 amps of current. Now you cannot directly connect this ammeter to the line, to any of this line without a shunt. The reason is because this was not meant to handle that much current. So the divider shunt, essentially what it does is the electricity comes into one side, and then it's actually divided down. So a little bit of the electricity actually comes up. I know it's probably hard to see that, but there's a band right up above. A little bit of electricity actually comes up, crosses that, and then continues on. So you have about 75 millivolts of resistance in there, because that electricity is actually sent upward towards these 2 points here, which then follows to my ammeter. So that it measures the current across without all the voltage, and that's important because these cannot handle that kind of current. They just can't. So this only allows so much voltage through the 2 points so that you can measure the amperage. So This shunt here, I think I paid about $12 for the shunt, just some no-name shunt or whatever. And along with it, I have this 10 gauge wire that runs up to the shunt, and that's running into this ammeter here. So since we're on the subject of ammeters and shunts, this is a no-name brand analog ammeter. Now, I wanted to go analog because I wanted something that was going to be generalized, and I mean that because this voltmeter here, any little fluctuation in voltage will move this around. And so I wanted to have a generalized look at what my solar panels were actually putting into the system. So if it's 5 amps, I'll see 5 amps. If it's 10 amps, I'll see 10 amps. If it's 15, I'll see that there, without the meter jumping all over the place. So this is sort of a slower way to view your amperage, and it's really accurate, so I don't have to worry about inaccuracies. And it is adjustable. There's a little plastic wheel there that I can adjust it to, and I actually used a voltmeter that has an analog, or that actually has an ammeter built in, to make sure that this was accurate, and it is. So I paid $9 for this thing. You'll see that I have some tape over here. Basically, when I cut the hole, I made some imperfections in it. This is just electrical tape that I used to just kind of fill it in and secure it a little bit better so it doesn't, pop out or anything. But you can see on the other side here, these two tabs right here actually keep it from going anywhere. But so yeah, nice little ammeter, but a shunt is required for it. So many people buy these things, hook it straight to whatever, they blow up almost instantaneously, and then they complain and take it back to Amazon. And it's just like, if you do your research, you'll figure out that a shunt is required for these ammeters. So anyway, that's pretty much it. Now the shunt right here, you can see here that it has a black and a red wire coming out of it. There is a polarity there, so it has to be a certain polarity, but essentially you've got a positive line and a positive line coming out, and the direction of the current actually determines which side goes where. So there's plenty of information on Google and so on how to wire these and so on. It's pretty simple, but I did have somebody make a comment that I had put my shunt in the wrong spot. There's nothing wrong with where I have the shunt. It's just measuring current across one line. So it takes the current in, measures it between 2 points, and then allows you to output that measurement to the ammeter, okay? Now before I continue on inside, you'll notice that I do have this voltmeter here. It is lighted, so I can see it in dark. It lights up blue. It only consumes about 15 to 20 milliamps. Sometimes I've seen it consume up to 30. That's generally rare. But it generally consumes about 15 to 20 milliamps of voltage, of amperage in order to keep this thing going. And I have adjusted this so it is right on. So the voltage of the battery right now is 13.44 volts. Okay, that's exactly what the battery is right now. That's what the charge controller sees. So this is a pretty accurate voltmeter, so that I can see what the system is doing without having to have the door open. Now right now, in this particular moment, you can see here that we have one heck of an overcast. There's a lot of fog, so my two panels out there are actually not putting out as much as they could be. In fact, my wait for this to focus here, probably won't be able to. Anyway, it looks like I'm putting out about a half of an amp. So that half of an amp, it is slowly charging the battery, but it's a slow charge. Now, I drain the battery to 80% and try to let it charge every night, or well, actually before sundown, so the battery actually has not reached what the charge controller is going to give it. So anyway, so that covers the actual voltmeter. This is like an unnamed brand voltmeter. I paid, I believe it was $9 Amazon Prime shipped to my door, so pretty reasonable price for this. And it is adjustable. I'm trying to do this without messing up the light. It is adjustable. There's the circuit on the back. There's 2 screws here that you can adjust the reading on there, and I have adjusted it so it's perfectly in sync with the battery. So from the shunt, you'll notice I have a single 8-gauge wire that runs into this switch. This is actually a Blue Sea Systems 6007 mini battery selector switch. It's one of the more pricey parts of my actual setup. This thing was $28 Amazon Prime shipped, but what's great about it is you can see here that it has basically 4 selections here. The one on the bottom I don't use, but 1 goes to my battery or charge controller, 2 goes to my grid tie inverter. This thing is rated for 300 amps at 32 volts, and I'm only running 12 volts through it, so I could actually run it higher than that, but of course I'm not going to. But this is a really nice switch. Make before break. This is the mini version. They actually have a larger version, but this is the smallest one they have, and you can see how it fits inside my entire setup. But anyway, so this switch here allows me to turn off the system so that I can work on it. It'll open up the circuit, so there's no voltage flowing through. Or I can have it in battery mode, which is where it's at now, so it's charging the battery. So the battery voltage should start rising as the sun starts coming out. Or I can switch it over to number 2, which is my grid tie inverter, which you can see right there. There's my grid tie inverter. I'll get into that here in a little bit. So I have the ability to switch between battery and grid tie inverter, and essentially what that allows me to do is while I'm away and the battery's charged, I have no need to dump, let's just say, 10 amps of DC current into the battery if the battery's already charged. So this charge controller is going to just stay in divert most of the time. So what I do is I switch over to my grid tie inverter, which is on 2 while I'm away, and that way I'm not losing any electricity. So that's the whole point in this switch here. That's basically why I have this here. Now I've got it set to 1 right now, so it charges the battery. When the battery's been floating for maybe an hour or so, I'll switch it over to 2, unless I'm home. If I'm home and I'm using stuff, then I stay on 1, and I just use my pure sine wave inverter to power my various electrical devices like my computer and so on. And I'll go into details about that later on, but this switch is a really nice switch. I never have it on 1+2. I never take all of the current coming in and divide it between the charge controller and the grid tie inverter, because they're going to try to pull equal amounts and it's going to cause problems. So it's either in 1 off or 2. So anyway, that's the purpose of the actual switch. So from the switch, you can see right here I actually have ring connectors. They're very large. They're meant for 2 to 4 gauge wire. Obviously it's a bit large, but the ring connectors, the reason is because the terminals on the back here are very large, so I needed to get ring connectors that were large enough, and that's fine. But anyway, I think I paid a couple bucks at Home Depot for these ring connectors. But the ring connector runs into an 8-gauge wire from my 1 post, and that runs into this AGU fuse. The fuse holder is actually a Rapture audio fuse holder, meant for high output audio systems for your car and so on. I paid, I think, $9 Prime shipped for that fuse holder. It's an AGU fuse holder. It was meant for 4-gauge to 8-gauge wires. The actual holders, it's a Rapture holder, and there's a lot of them out there. These are gold plated. So inside there is a 25 amp AGU fuse. Now AGU fuses are larger, so I didn't want to go with a standard automotive fuse. I decided to go with an AGU fuse. It's 25 amps. So if any more than 25 amps makes it through to this, it's going to be stopped right there. And that's to protect this charge controller. So for the fuses, I got a pack of 5 for a couple bucks on Amazon Prime. It wasn't that expensive. Okay, so now on to the brains of the entire setup. This is a Flex Charge NC25A-12 charge controller. And this is a really nice charge controller, probably most likely the best on the market. The reason it's so good is because of its efficiency. It is 99.5, so 99.5% or greater efficiency, and you just really can't get any better than that. There's a lot of charge controllers on the market, there really are, And it's easy to see a cheap one and say, okay, that's going to take care of it, but you have to realize the efficiency rating of actually taking the power in and the power out. This thing will take at least 99.5% of the energy coming in, convert it to the energy required to charge the battery. So there's very little loss there, and I actually see better than 99.5%. I have more videos in particular on this subject on my YouTube channel, so you gotta check those out. But this is probably, as I said, the best charge controller on the market. Now, they make these in different voltages, different amperages. They make expansion sets for them so that you can use this charge controller, and you basically set up a slave actuator, so the charge controller just controls the actuator, which actually takes care of the charging, and this just keeps track of the voltage and knows when to open and close it and go into divert and non-divert and so on. But it's pretty nice. You can Google search this charge controller and get all the information you want, but I'll tell you that I have a 12 volt deep cycle battery. It's an AGM battery, and it's a solar battery, so it was meant specifically for solar energy. And this company, the Flex Charge company, was telling me that their way of charging batteries was actually better than what was recommended by the actual battery company, and I had a hard time believing that. But after exchanging emails back and forth with one of their technicians, they definitely convinced me that this charge controller is the best way to charge a battery. Of course, it'll charge all sorts of different kinds of batteries. You got sealed, you got wet, NiCad batteries, and so this, I did a lot of research, and I had my heart set on this one eventually. And you can adjust the voltage, so I can tell it basically when to go into divert. Right now I've got it set for 14.15 volts, and so when the battery reaches that charge, then it'll go into divert and it'll begin to float the battery. So it's really, really nice. And I was so lucky when I found this. You can generally get these for about $120 to $140 depending on where you go. I got this on eBay. I got it for a steal. The guy posted it for $75, free shipping. There were no bids on it. I got it at the last second. I got such a deal on this, but expect to pay at least $100 for this. And but I'm telling you, it is by far the best on the market. It doesn't have all the, a lot of the charge controllers have all the lights that light up, or they'll have voltage and amperage and all sorts of different things on there. I don't need any of that. I basically wanted something that was going to convert as much energy as possible to the battery, so I didn't lose as much. So this definitely does it. And you can see I got input, battery, divert, charge indicator, which I don't use. Divert I actually don't use either. And then the battery sensing wires. So it's pretty simple. It's it's pretty much dummy proof. The instructions tell you exactly how to hook this up, and so really, really nice. So you can see from the fuse I actually have an 8-gauge wire running into the input. So that's where the electricity goes into from my bicycle generator, from my solar panels, and goes into there. So, and then of course one 8-gauge wire output. This goes to the positive side of the battery, directly to the battery. Doesn't run through anything else. Just an 8-gauge wire that runs down to the battery. So that's the charging, basically, port. And divert I don't use. I did use. I'll get into that in a little while. And the charge indicator I don't use because it does use electricity to actually light that little itty-bitty light. It seems like it shouldn't be that much, but when you have wind generators in particular that are barely spinning, that can actually be enough to prevent your battery from charging. I know it sounds weird, but it actually can prevent your battery from charging if it's using all the wind power just for that little lamp that's underneath there. So yeah, so anyway, that's pretty much the details of the charge controller. It'll work with pretty much any batteries. I've got it set up for 12 volts, but it will take up to, I believe it's 50 or 60 volts input. It'll take up to that much voltage and bring it down to what the battery needs. So don't worry about your battery hitting 60 volts or something like that because of this. It's going to only allow it to charge to a certain point. But I have it set up in a 12 volt system. My panels put out an open circuit. They put out between 20 and 22 volts. My bicycle generator puts out about 20 volts. So it's not as if the over voltage a little bit is going to harm the charge controller. It was designed to bring that voltage down when it's charging a battery. So from the charge controller, the battery positive, battery negative sensing wires, I just have two simple 10 gauge wires. There is a 2 amp fuse inside there. It's an AGC fuse. I got the fuse for, it was a couple bucks, 5-pack. Wasn't that expensive. That fuse holder is just a standard automotive fuse holder that I got actually at my local store for a couple bucks. And the fuse there is to protect against a short. In case something shorts out, that'll take care of it. That's the whole point in having the fuse. Okay. Now, on a side note, I do also have a fuse on my voltmeter. You can see here, there is a fuse that's at the bottom of the battery. So I do have another 2 amp fuse on that, just in case these wires become crossed or this shorts out or something. So that runs straight to the battery. As required from the charge controller, these two run straight to the battery. They do not run through my terminal block or anything else like that. They go straight to the battery. That is so the charge controller knows exactly what the voltage is of the battery. That's so important. Now, you wouldn't think that, oh, you know, a couple extra hundredths of a volt, you know, not going to affect the battery at all. It will over time. Okay, believe me when I say that it will over time. Batteries are very fickle, okay, and they like certain conditions and certain voltages, and that's how they're built. So when this thing charges to 14.15, it stops at 14.15. It doesn't go up to 1420 or 1416 or 1418. So it needs to have a direct connection to the battery to know exactly when to shut off or go into divert. Okay, so with that in mind, that's why I have the wires connected directly to the battery. That's where they run down. So they run into the back of the battery. So that is all important to have those two there. Now, they don't carry much current, but I still chose to go with a 10 gauge wire simply because you know, that's what I decided to do. So the negative terminal block here actually has, in the middle there is my solar panels, negative, my bicycle generator, negative, and then on the left here is the negative running from the battery. So I have an 8 gauge wire running from the negative post on the battery to this corner here, and then I jump it across like this. So the entire terminal becomes a negative, so that becomes ground for the entire system. Okay, so I don't have it grounded in the wall, or I don't have you know, it grounded to an actual real ground. It's just grounded to the battery itself. So the battery, you know, acts as its own ground. So essentially, this terminal block provides all the ground that I need for the entire system. Okay, and just like the positive, it's 8 gauge wire that's running across there. I just cut some pieces, used the spade terminals I mentioned before, and just jumped across. They do make jumpers that are specific for this purpose, but I didn't want to spend that kind of money. I had the extra wire, I had the terminals, so I decided to go ahead and make it that way. But I can expand on this if I want to, so it's great. I've got room on both sides to expand. One last thing before I close this box. You'll notice this wood backing here that I have. This is an arts and craft material. It's just a craft wood. It's I think it's 10 or 8 millimeters thick. I mean, it's just real thin. And all I did was I cut it to fit this. I actually got the wood at Hobby Lobby, and they made a piece that was just the right size. I did have to trim it down a little bit to fit in here, but this wood actually provides the ability for me to mount all of my stuff, like the switches and the charge controller and everything else in here is mounted directly to the wood. And it's thick enough to hold all this stuff. I don't have a lot of weight on here. And then also, as another side note, on the back here, I've got two pieces. I found the studs on this wall here, and I've got two pieces here of 1x2 wood that I have the actual enclosure box mounted to the wall too. So I didn't mount the enclosure box directly to the wall, I mounted it to these wood pieces here, just to keep it off the wall a little bit. So yeah, I think it was about, I don't know, probably $4 or $5 for that piece of wood there. And then for the 1x2s, I actually had these on hand already, but I think it was a couple of bucks for a 4-foot or 8-foot piece of 1x2. Real cheap, so yeah, not much there. So that covers the inside of my box, okay? And it's real simple, it's clean, it's efficient, and you know, with everything said and done on the inside with the box and everything, I probably have well, probably about $200 $200 to $250 worth of stuff here inside this box. The charge controller being the most expensive part. You can expect to spend about $250 to $300 for the stuff. I just got such a good deal on that charge controller, I was lucky. But between the wire and everything else in there, that's approximately what I paid.